The original series did not have Olivia Armstrong. Game, set, and match. Brotherhood wins. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. It's one of the few series I have in my recommendations that I feel like I can show to anyone. It's consistently engaging where a lot of series would waste time, it has almost a complete lack of any flaws, and well, the show is really quite mature. Just like me.
Just how many people are inside you?
There's a joke here. There's a joke here! Before making this video, I'd never actually watched the original, and I don't think I'm biased, but keep in mind I've done 2 previous runs of Brotherhood in the past before watching both series once for this video. So, I might have a better understanding of the more complicated plot points in Brotherhood than I do FMA. Oh yeah, 2 things before I start. 1, oh god, spoilers for Brotherhood and FMA. And 2, for speed reasons, I'm going to be referring to Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood as Brotherhood, and I'm going to be referring to the 2003 anime as FMA or the original. Probably should have mentioned this first, actually. Also, oh god, that's weird. Anyway, let's talk about the first episode. The first thing I noticed about FMA was that the first episode was actually pretty damn strong. It fills in a lot of really interesting details about the story straight away. I think this might have been removed from the first episode of Brotherhood because it was considered exposition, but it is possible to have good exposition, and the idea of trying to bring your mother back to life because you were a dumb kid and therefore changing your life forever, that's dark and a pretty fucking interesting way to start a story. Of course, you can't really use this point against Brotherhood, because the same details do appear to fulfill their engagement value eventually. What I can say is that Trisha, the Eldrick brother's mother, gets more screen time and has some more endearing scenes in the first 2 episodes of FMA. All in all, I was more invested in her, and it made her death and the events surrounding it just a lot sadder, so props to the original for that one. Then there's some smaller things between the first episodes of both series too. The big one is that the expectation and denial of the fact that Ed's arm is made of metal is handled a lot nicer in the original. In Brotherhood, you're only given a few minutes to understand what alchemy is and get the whole patty cake shenanigans before somebody tries to use alchemy on Ed's arm. Because the audience hasn't totally got the understanding of what alchemy is yet, you're not really expecting that Ed's arm should be taking serious damage from this blow. So this scene is a lot weaker. But in the original, it's a chimera that tries to take a bite of his arm, and it's immediately understandable that this should do serious damage, but surprise, his arm is made of shiny hard. There's also the fact that now it looks like our main character is totally unflinching to a fucking lion, and that's some added coolness right there. Unfortunately, after the first episode, points do start to begin stacking against the original. The biggest point is filler. There are a bunch of episodes early in the series that could be considered filler. They're a bit better than normal filler because they're usually connected to already established plot elements with the filler characters, i.e. that one guy in episode 4 being an important alchemist linked to the Philosopher's Stone. But for the most part, the filler characters have their story focused on, and they aren't really interesting characters to begin with, and ugh. In Brotherhood, you don't get these episodes, but these stories are actually acknowledged to have happened, and the characters from them do appear after the point they would have first debuted, with a couple of lines to join up the dots. And while it was cool in the original to see Barry the Chopper first appear in a filler episode as a human and then appear later as a soul-bonded armor, it probably wasn't quite worth the whole episode of pointlessness needed to set it up. Brotherhood just seems to cut out all the right stuff. In fact, Brotherhood just seems to be faster and more refined in general. The Shao Tucker arc... sorry, I just got a... Holy fucking fetus toasters, what is wrong with you? In Brotherhood, this is just 1 episode, whereas in FMA it's 2 episodes. And you'd think you'd be missing key information, but nope, not really. In fact, I'd debate I was a hell of a lot more invested in Brotherhood Nina and Alexander than in FMA. I mean, first off, in Brotherhood, Nina's voice doesn't sound like she managed to get the pacifier lodged in the back of her throat a year ago.
Not yet!
Nina is also portrayed as a bit more of someone they like to spend time with when they take breaks from their research, as opposed to being a little bit more of a nuisance to their work in the original series. But that's pretty subtle. Also, Alexander has a lot more personality in Brotherhood too. Wait, I have a question. If this chimera is made from a dog called Alexander, and a girl named Nina, what gender is this thing? You're probably imagining dog and child genitals now. You disgust me. There are things about this arc that are just better done as well. For instance, in the original, you get these darker looks from Shoutaka before the plot twist is revealed, but in Brotherhood, it's a complete surprise. And I would argue that the total 180 with no warning really emphasized this plot twist. Also, while the original series gives you a bunch of hints about Tucker's nature, and based on the atmosphere and clues and the way that Ed is acting because he himself also suspects, you can kinda tell a twist. But in Brotherhood, the twist is set up so the reveal can be done in one single snappy line that lets you work out everything in an instant, and it's so beautiful.
Big Brother Ed.
Also, there are some weird logical shenanigans in the original. I don't know why, but in the original, Tucker requires them to break into a laboratory in order to show them his new creation. Like, what? Why? Why you break the law just so you could see something? Why is it on lockdown anyway? You're both alchemists. Why can't you just show your research normally? I don't know. It's a very small point, but still, what? Why was this added confusion necessary? I'm gonna stop talking about this episode now. I know people are sensitive about this one.
Your assessment's in 2 days. It's time to show or roll over.
Or better yet, show and roll over, 'cause it's a dog. Sorry. Anyway, Brotherhood refines a lot of other stuff, and I'll be getting into more of the other examples as I get into my other points. My next point is gonna be weird to digest, but I think Brotherhood has far better characters. And I don't just mean the two big new characters, i.e. Olivia Armstrong and Mei Chang. Oh, and of course her pet panda Xiao Mei. Look at it, it's so cute. Om nom nom! No, I mean that characters like Edward and Alphonse are simply better characters in Brotherhood. Which is weird, because like, they're the same characters. But they're not. Actions are, I think, the most defining feature about a character, and while both these characters look like Ed, act like Ed, and sound like Ed, if one Ed punches a cat in the pussy, you're ultimately going to like one Ed less. That makes them different characters. And while no one's committing animal abuse, wait, no, people are totally doing that. While protagonists aren't committing animal abuse, FMA does seem to have this problem with melodrama and bitchiness that Brotherhood doesn't have. Characters can make big deals out of nothing and tend to act immaturely, and FMA's Ed is the worst offender of this. For example, after the events of Shoutaka, he sulks for a while, gives up on hope of finding the Philosopher's Stone when there's a lead right in front of him, and then gives up his pocket watch and his title of State Alchemist. Ed just gave up everything they fucking worked for. I mean, Al isn't being a little bitch, and he went through the exact same thing. But Ed? I mean, fuck, I was led to believe that he felt responsible for his brother's state, but nope, fuck that, just gonna give it all up because a little girl died. And of course Ed sees the error in his ways at the end and all, but look at it in Brotherhood. This whole bitch fit never happened. He and Al are just sad about it, and rightly so. And this leads straight into the first fight with Scar. But it's in this fight that Ed in his depression tries to give up his life in order to keep Al safe. See, this right here, this is a much more mature way of being about the problem. At least in Brotherhood, Ed obviously cared about Al. I mean, it's not the right way of handling it, because Al tells him about how he can't help anyone if he dies, and generally leads him out of this depression. But the brothers are just a whole lot more endearing here. Plus, this scene leads to one of my favorite lines in the series, which by the way isn't as good in the original.
Oh, great! And now my arms come off because my brother's a big fat idiot! Oh, this is perfect! Now my arm's falling off too! Today is a terrible day!
To be fair, I mean, FMA does have some jokes that Brotherhood doesn't have that I've quite liked.
As soon as you're finished, I want you to go home, and you're fired. Never come here again.
Also, back on the topic of refining stuff from the original series, here's something cool. In FMA, the big fight with Scar happens well after Shoutaka. Ed still tries to sacrifice his life, but this time it's not backed up with a strong reasoning after the shock of Nina. Originally, Ed did have this little depression arc, and it was resolved in one of the fillerish episodes where they introduced the entirely new character Barry the Chopper. But why do that when you can completely cut out this new, somewhat shoehorned character and continue building on Scar, all the while bringing Ed through his depression arc? Not only is it more emotional and well thought out, but two scenes have basically been slotted together and the time investment has effectively been cut in half. It's beautiful. Anyway, the melodrama I was talking about before isn't just an off case. There are a bunch of smaller, one-off lines drifting around. Ed tends to jerk genuine tantrums every now and then. But the other big example is episode 23 of FMA, where now Alphonse is the one being a bitch.
Right, Al?
Just do what she says, Ed. Drink the dumb milk.
He's worried about the whole what if I'm artificial plot point, and he starts being really fucking passive aggressive and starts actually thinking everyone's lying to him, despite how unrealistic that is. In Brotherhood, this is much more of just a slightly worrying idea that's just been gnawing at him. But Jesus Christ, in FMA, Al runs away and everything, and it's just ugh. And then there's the shit with Winry in episode 26, and oh my god, okay, I'm done with this. Back on to just characters in general. Scar in Brotherhood is a big improvement from the original. In Brotherhood, he appears a bit after Ed and Al figure out that the Chimera is Nina and Alexander. His badass debut is him confidently entering, killing a bunch of people, fully understanding the situation he's in, and then neatly cleaning up the Shao Tucker plotline. Or, well, I mean, clean up probably isn't the right term, but in FMA? In FMA, he's a fucking tsundere.
Hey, come back!
He's just a lot more unsure and less confident because he's in the process of understanding and coming to terms with his backstory. And maybe that works in terms of character development, but the golden rule of character development is that you have to be invested in the character to care about their development. Scar has just been introduced, and at this point he seems fairly uninteresting. So I give a lot more of a shit about Brotherhood Scar. Also, I'm 90% sure that Scar's Scar is really just an embarrassing tan line. Calling yourself Scar to make people assume it's a scar. Nice cover up, man. A lot of the villains are better designed too. King Bradley and Envy in particular get more screen time and yet more badass scenes. You wouldn't have Bradley taking out a tank in half of Central or Envy getting rage fucked by Mustang without Brotherhood. To FMA's credit though, Trisha has more endearing scenes and Izumi Curtis is debatably a lot cooler. In FMA she takes on an entire base and it's pretty badass. But Brotherhood does seem to make up somewhat for it with other scenes of badassery. And without Brotherhood, you wouldn't have the awesome follow-up to her I'm a housewife line, when near the end of the series she says, "I am an alchemist!" Another big point is developmental arcs. In the original series, both Greed and Scar die before they have any proper development, where in Brotherhood, Scar completely changes sides, sees the error of his ways, and works together to change the world. In the original, he gets kinda halfway before dying. I don't know, just wasn't quite as satisfying, and the death wasn't really worth the shock value. But Greed is the worst offender. So you know how in Brotherhood Greed appears early on in the series, provides a bunch of information on Central and what it's hiding, things like chimeras and homunculi, and the whole arc is a lead into the twist that Bradley is a homunculi and a villain, as well as some setup for Al's development, not to mention setting up Greed's own character for development. Remember that? Well, in FMA, Greed's arc happens near the end of the series and literally provides none of those things. Effectively, all he's there to do is introduce the way you can kill Homunculus, and then he dies. This leads me into my next point. So FMA and Brotherhood are really quite similar at the start, but the further you get through the series, the more they branch off. And here's where FMA starts introducing some totally new stuff that apparently wasn't in the manga. Surprisingly, it's not bad. A couple of twists like Tucker's return, the idea of homunculi being created from human transmutation, the homunculi wanting to be human, I think they actually work quite well. Some of the most interesting stuff was finding out about this new character, Wrath. And yes, he looks like an Envy ripoff, but the idea of this kid roaming around who had Ed's arm and leg was really cool. The only problem is that the deeper and deeper you get into FMA, the more convoluted it gets. This has been my only real problem with Fullmetal Alchemist as a whole, really. The science of the world is a little glossed over, and if it was properly fleshed out, I feel I could have understood the story better and appreciated the smarter points more. I feel like Brotherhood and the original could have really profited from an episode or two of lore exposition in the same way that Hunter x Hunter did. Yeah, it's exposition, but it's totally worth it. Trying to wrap my head around things like the escape from gluttony was really difficult at first. Mind you, I think FMA was probably more convoluted. In Brotherhood, the only thing I had particular issue with was the whole bringing down God thing, which was really only iffy at worst. FMA is just, I don't totally understand what's happening, but again, that might be biased, because I've watched Brotherhood more times than I have FMA. Finally, I should probably mention endings. Both I think are actually pretty solid if you count the Conqueror of Shambhala. It was a pretty solid closure for the series and dealt with the weirdness of FMA's ending quite well. The ending of FMA is still very weird, by the way. Did you know FMA starts using parallel dimensions between Amestris and the real world? Because I didn't. I suppose there's nothing bad about it per se, but it's definitely weird. I suppose it's not that weird. In FMA, I think it was always the real world, but with alchemy. They don't mention the word Amestris once, like in Brotherhood. That's something cool that Brotherhood does, though. The world map is a lot more fleshed out, although the expansive world has some drawbacks. Xing's Chinese inspiration creates some confusion with its names.
We need to get home so we can bury Fu.
But the couple of cool points FMA did have over Brotherhood doesn't really compare to the sheer amount of amazing moments from its remastered work. I mean, Brotherhood had Ed and Al's reunion at the portal, Brotherhood had Olivia Armstrong, it had the twist that Celine Bradley was also a homunculus, it had Mustang killing Envy, it had Mustang come back to kill Lust, it had Al choosing to use the Philosopher's Stone, it had Ed sacrificing the portal, it had clever fight scenes, like how Ling uses Gluttony's regeneration powers against him. And this isn't even considering all the amazing action scenes and music whose technical stuff has been a major upgrade since 2003. Yeah, it's pretty hard to see FMA remaining on top, but I think everyone saw that coming. I mean, that's the point of a remastering, isn't it? Granted, I don't think I'm biased. I can sing FMA's praises too. In fact, I'd like to dedicate this last section to some of the little things I thought FMA did better. It's small stuff, and it doesn't really beat everything I've gone over with Brotherhood, but, you know, still. 1. Lust was a better villain. She actually had a backstory and some depth to her that meant she betrayed the other homunculus. This was definitely better than Brotherhood, but I guess it makes sense for Lust to have not much in Brotherhood since she dies pretty early in the series. Also, there are no sex scenes for Lust in either series. As far as I can tell, the physical embodiment of Lust has no sex drive. This should have been fixed in Brotherhood, for story reasons. Number 2, Azumi Curtis was done better in some other ways too. For instance, they actually made the connection that her lower torso organs being missing meant that she would never have children. A little bit of poetic irony there. Number 3, I really like the twist that Mustang was actually the one that killed Windry's parents. I understand why this was changed, because it would fuck up a ton of stuff with Scar's story and relationship with Winry and the Elrics, but the twist itself was pretty confronting. Number 4, the concept of soul bonding is a little more sensical in the original. Ed knows that the portal traded his arms away, so he draws transmutation circles on his body parts and tries and achieves the same effect there, to get Al's soul back. I'm not sure why this was removed though. Maybe it messed with something else? I don't know. And 5, Dante, the final villain of FMA, is at least decent. In fact, I put her on par with the final villain of Brotherhood. But of course, the final villain of Brotherhood was completely outshined by other characters. All in all, I was surprised by FMA. It honestly beat my expectations, and I was pretty engaged by a lot of it. But in the end, Brotherhood claims victory. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.